Good afternoon, evening, or morning, wherever you may be. I am Ultima Leo, and I will be starting a new series today, hopefully to help people like myself trying to get into competitive Vanguard. Essentially, what we'll be doing here is we'll be looking at a lot of the top meta decks in the current format and just kind of giving like a decent breakdown as to what the decks do and what your potential ways to out them are. So without further ado, I welcome you to the first episode of What Do It Do? Hey everybody, so today I am starting something new. The reason why I'm doing this is because I am currently trying to get into competitive Vanguard. There is the Bushy Road Summerfest coming up. I had a couple of friends that invited me to come to play, and I'm just like, okay, yeah, sure. So I've been catching up, at least with my deck for now, but then it dawned on me that I don't really know matchups like that in this game, right? So it's just like what to guard, how to guard, and other things like that. So I was like, all right, well, I guess I'll just take notes and study. And a lot of the resources that I have found have been very limited to either watching matches or reading the cards themselves and trying to infer based off of that information. So what I plan to do with these is, as I stated, just going over any of the different top meta decks that are currently in the format. And today I am going to start off with the Sealed Blaze Maiden herself, Bavsargara. So I have my notes here. I'm going to go through them and I'm going to try and make this as clear and concise as I can. Hopefully not stumbling over a million words. But essentially the thing that I've noticed the most about this deck is it's pretty big number beatdown. There's a lot of units. The idea behind it is as it's going up in turns, you get more arms. It plays arms through drop. And it is it's pretty counterblast focused. So I guess we'll just hop straight into it, right? So I guess to start, I am going to start with the ride line itself. So the grade 0 is your pretty standard grade 0, right? You just draw if you go second. Nothing too crazy there. Now the grade 1 is when it can start working on getting its engine together. I feel like as the grade 1, it will Soul Blast one card. You reveal Bavsargara from your ride deck, and then you can grab either the sword or the shield. It does also have an additional effect at the bottom. It lets you, if you have 2 or more arms on your Vanguard circle, this unit gets power plus 2000, and that'll be active on your opponent's turn too, which is cool, but you probably aren't going to see this deck outside the ride line too often. So unless you have something that lets you call from Soul, probably not going to see that boost that often. Now Soul Blast, you pretty much get that just by playing the game for the most part. Essentially, you just Soul Blast the grade 1 or the grade 0, and then there you go, problem solved. Now the grade 2, you will need to counterblast to use its ability. For those that don't know, because I know I'm making this for a lot of people that may be trying to get into it, when you are counterblasting is essentially your damage zone gives you access to extra skills. But for this, this only works on grade 3 turn. So if Bavsargara, if they're on grade 3 Bavsargara turn and you ride over the grade 2 unit, then you can select 2 arms from the deck, counterblast 1, select 2 arms from the deck, and then you place, discard them. Shuffle the deck, and then you can choose 1 arm in drop to arm your Vanguard. Now, this essentially gives Bavsargara access to full arms on grade 3 turn, with a combination of the ability from the grade 1 and from the grade 2. Because then you'll have to, depending on what arm you've selected, with a sword or shield, you'll have to pay a cost to play that, but the cost could be different. And then obviously Bavsargara herself, right? This card is the meat and potatoes of the ride line. So this is when all the effects and stuff get to pop off. This is when the deck gets like super scary, I would say, when you can Soul Blast, or I'm sorry, not Soul Blast, right? On place. She doesn't do much, but what you'll do is you'll Soul Blast 2. She should be playing cards that'll let her soul charge. So you'll Soul Blast 2 and retire the front row, as long as she's on. So if she's got both arms on, that's a front row board wipe. Not a whole lot that can be done against that. So would probably advise, once you're on like grade 3 turn, if anything, mitigate it to like 1 unit. Now I'll explain why. Depending on if she retires units or not, she either gets +1 critical or she can draw a card. I'm sorry. So with that, her being able to draw gives her more access to either another play, depending on what she picks up, or extra guard power. Depending on how that goes, and I'll probably get to the guarding strategies a little bit later on, you're probably going to consider, do I let her draw a card, or do I just try to eat the critical, or whatever, right? Just depending on what deck you're playing, that can all vary too. So I do also want to go over some of the other units as well, right? Notably the grade 2s. Once she gets to grade 2 turn, a lot of stuff is happening right now. So there's the Apira. You run that. That lets you search for Vanlord, or lets you search for arms. And then Divistia is a card that gives your Vanguard, or it'll get boost if Bavsargara has 2 arms equipped. So that gives it like a really big number. But then there's the like reason why I'm not playing this deck right now. Yugmashai card is like super expensive. It lets you gather resources. Then they get to draw. They'll get like extra damage as well on your grade 3 turn. This card also is the only actual like restander in the deck, so you'll have to pick and choose when to guard for restands and stuff like that. But it does cost 1 counterblast as well, and this is why I'm going to get into like more of the offensive or defensive strategies for this coming up soon. The last thing I would like to go over are the grade 1s for the most part, right? You have Trick Moon, which is a grade 0, but it can be overdressed in a Vanlord. Vanlord, it gets targeting protection. So there's some cards that can get rid of it, but the cards that can are cards that'll take out like the entire row. And I usually put it in the back row as well because of the dress boost ability. So with the dress boost, I believe this, if Bav has the arms on her, then the whole front row gets plus 5k. So it essentially is like 1 card that'll give 5k to the entire front row, which it does give bigger numbers. Now, the last one I want to go over is Cindy, the Sealed Blaze Maiden. So it lets that deck, you can search for arms or Vanguard, and then she can revive herself if the Trick Moon is placed on the rear column, if through like a Bavsargara skill or something, and then it is an extra boost for whatever unit that's underneath, maybe under Yugmashai, just because, you know, restander, extra damage, other things like that. And then the arms are the next part, or the next topic I want to get into, just to kind of explain what those do. So there's a sword, there's a shield, there's a mace, and then there's an axe. From what I've seen, most deck builds typically run sword, shield, and mace. They don't always run axe, but I've seen some builds that do use it, so I will bring it up for the sake of this video. The sword, first off, this gives Bavsargara, it gives the whole front row an extra 5k power. It'll give Bavsargara +1 drive as well on opponent's grade 3 turn. Now, to play this, you will have to counterblast to be able to play this card from hand. So that's why playing the other cards like the grade 2 and the ride line, you're still counterblasting anyway, but you're moving the resources around your deck, then you're getting easier access to your triggers and other things like that, which other strategies probably should cover as well. The mace is the other right-handed arm. Doesn't cost a counterblast to play this card. It can retire back row rear guard, like rear guard column, or rear guard. It can retire the back row rear column, and it'll grant Vanguard an extra 10k until the end of the turn. The back row doesn't have protection, then you're probably gonna get, it's probably gonna get scooped up, to be real. And then like that arm goes into the drop at the end of the turn, and you replace it with another right arm. So you would, or right arm to hand. So it would typically be like, what from what I've seen is they'll like sword and then mace, and then, you know, at the end of the turn they get the sword back to hand, or sometimes they'll just straight up sword and then just go from there. Well, actually it's sometimes mace sword, but that in itself is kind of fucking scary, because you go sword and then mace and then blah blah blah. So shield, this card gives you like a free draw once you've armed it, essentially. You do have to counterblast to play the shield, but it will, she can soul blast one and then give the front, or actually for defensive bonus, that's what it is. I have my notes, but I'm reading them and I'm trying to like recite as I go along, so bear with me, please. But you have the shield, right? Once you arm the shield, you get the draw. It does offer a defensive bonus, so on grade 3 turn, I believe, the card gets a bonus 10k power, or Bavsargara will get a 10k power bonus once she's attacked, and they can choose to activate that or not. They can also choose to soul blast to give them an extra 20k instead of a 10k. So that'll be like, they get easier opportunities to guard, and Bavsargara gets a lot of resources in hand, so guarding isn't really that difficult for that deck from my experience. And then there's the other left arm, is the axe. So when a Vanguard does attack with this card equipped, you have to guard with 2 or more. So if Bavsargara is out on the field and she's equipped with the axe, she's forcing 2 cards out of your hand to guard her at any time. And that'd be like, you have to use PG and then something else. Now you can counterblast 1 to drop the cost, or actually, I'm sorry. Yeah, you counterblast 1 to get another arm from drop, a left arm from drop, so you can basically go from axe to shield. So now what these arms do when they are attached to Bavsargara, right? Once she has the arms equipped, that's when she can use that soul blast ability that I mentioned earlier, and retires the whole front row. She just needs any 2, a left and a right, and soul blast 2, that front row is gone. So you can see how kind of getting into that situation that I mentioned earlier, where you may, if you can, try to have at least 1 unit on board, because then she gets that +1 critical. Now going into like some of the guarding strategies for this deck, it is one of those things where it's like grade 3 turns will get increasingly difficult to block the more that Bavsargara equips arms onto herself. So Yugmashad, right, being the grade 2, this can restand, but it can only restand after Bavsargara attacks. So that normally is going to be that initial attacker. If they have 2 of them, good luck. That's going to be a lot of numbers you're going to have to swing over. But it doesn't gain anything additional outside of whatever criticals Bavsargara brings to the table, right? So Bavsargara, she gets +1 drive. So like in a situation, she's got a +1 drive on, so now she gets to pull triggers and she gets like 2 crits, right? Depending on if you guard Bob or if you guard the if you don't guard her, that'll kind of set up a different damage situation depending on what you're in. Now, and it's like another thing to keep in mind is if the number is big, it's just a big number. Depending on how early or late you are into the game, sometimes just taking the damage is worth it. That's basically what I've noticed thus far, right? if you're like, if it's a really big number and you don't have to guard it, and it's only the 1 damage, just take the 1 damage. Now it gets a little more tricky when you've been like guarding big numbers just because they're big numbers and scary, and you end up to a point where, well, now I've counterblasted, my Yugma shot is restand, and now it gets like an extra 2 critical off of the triggers from the Bavsargara, right? Now you got a problem. Because not only did you waste most of your guarding resources in hand blocking, like, say, like a 40k Yugma shot or something, and now you're like, oh god, what do I do? And you got nothing in hand. Now you're eating 3 damage, right? And that could be the game, unless you know, over heal, or the 6 damage heal, which is, you're putting a lot of faith into the deck to be able to draw those when you need to, and I think that's fine. I'm not gonna say here and act like that's an issue, especially with Vanguard. I think that's one of the more fun aspects anyway, at least in my opinion, right? Now, as far as the other grade 2s, it was Divistia and the Apira. Now, Apira doesn't really get like super big numbers. It's really there just for kind of the search, so you know, that guard as you will. Divistia, I would say, is probably going to be one of those that's a little bit harder to guard. It doesn't get a restand or anything, but if it gets any boosts, then, you know, you're guarding with a lot more resources from hand, having a PG, other things like that. And then now Bavsargara. This one is the tricky one as far as like guarding, because depending on what gets wiped, right? So in the situation that I've been providing earlier, you leave at least 1 card on field, she double arms up, soul blasts, and then wipes front row. Cool. She gets +1 critical now. That you're probably going to want to guard, because if she's also doing that, she may have shield on. She may have the sword, right? She'll probably have sword on. Sword gives front row another +5, and then she gets +1 drive. Adding to that situation where now you have a 2 damage Bavsargara with triple drive. That is a prime opportunity for any perfect guards you may have, right? Like your standard Sentinels or Elementaria or anything along those lines. You would guard with one of those, right? Now she can't swing, but now the other rear guards can. The other rear guards are kind of like, okay, cool. Like I said, the Apira and the Divistia, sure. The Yugma shot is the one where it's like, okay, that one, depending on the situation, I would typically, personally, depending on damage values, obviously, right? I'm not going to guard the first one. I'll guard the second, because the second one is the one that gets the extra boosts. It'll have either a boost from the back row, if say they do bring Cindy back, or they have a Trick Moon back there, right? So you get a boost from the back row unit on top of whatever other boost that it got from the trigger, right? So that one is, you should probably guard that. The later you get into the game, obviously, the less resources you may have, it'll get harder to do that. But this is just to kind of protect you for a bit more in like the mid-game stages. That way you're not trying to throw out resources and then get fucked over at the end of it. And then there are, so I guess those are basically like my ideas for like guarding this deck, right? Bavsargara is a guard priority. The Yugma shot on restand is a guard priority, but if you can take the damage, just take the damage. It's just a 1, right? If there's no extra criticals or anything, it's just a 1, right? If they OT the Dragon Empire over trigger, at that point, I mean, it is what it is at that point. I'm gonna be honest, like, it just, like, that's the, you know, he restand Vanguard, so Bob gets to do it again. That's no fun. Now, as far as offensive strategies go, so a couple of things that you can do to kind of mitigate this deck from being able to do things really early. Because remember, a lot of the abilities require counter blasts, and the deck doesn't have any real means to counter charge, right? So equipping an arm, equipping sword and shield requires a counter blast. Restanding Yugma Shot requires a counter blast. Things like that. You go on grade 3 turn for it to ride a card from, or ride, for it to arm a card from drop, it requires a counter blast. Like, to even search a card, to search for 2 arms to send to drop requires counter blast. So a lot of the things that make the deck really scary to do require a lot of those counter blast situations to happen. Damage denial is very good in the early stages. If you can mitigate yourself to like, or you mitigate her to maybe like 2 damage by grade 3 turn, you know, obviously you want to win. So just sitting there and not attacking isn't the best. But if you can clear out the rear guard, then clear it out. Like preferably, yeah, if you can swing on the front row rear columns, swing on those. Try and deny as much damage as possible. Now, if you are playing some decks that just can interact with the rear columns and remove those cards from there, like Prison, or I know Arsaria has the lock mechanic. Varga wipes the front row during battle. So like other things like that, you don't necessarily have to target those, but you do have to be a bit more mindful about how you're going to attack the Vanguard going forward. How much damage are you willing to give? Or if anything, are you willing to just straight up rush down, like straight up beat down? You wipe all of the you wipe all the rear column units and you just go in, start swinging on Vanguard. That itself can be risky because when it gets to grade 3 turn or any later turns, then those attacks will increase. The ability to use those skills will also increase. Just some things to keep in mind while you're on the offensive when playing against this deck. Now, all that said, I feel like Bavsargara is incredibly strong, obviously, but I feel more like the deck, it just plays this game, like the current game, very well. Is really what causes it to do as well as it does, making it like hard to kind of guard against, making it hard to make a decision when you're on offense, other things like that. The deck itself not necessarily having to care so much about some decks, like, okay, cool, removal, whatever. You know, like, if you can weaken any of those cards, you know, by all means do so. You're playing Levy Dress, you got one of the markers on the field, awesome. Boost yourself, weaken them, do what it do, and you get it done. This was a lot more rambly than I wanted it to be, but by the next one, hopefully I'll have like a bigger groove and a better understanding of how I want to relay those messages a little bit. This is the first episode, it's really rough. It's also the first time I've done anything like this, so it's incredibly rough. But all in all, that being said, if you stuck around this long, thank you. I will continue this. I am working on the next deck, taking those notes and everything as well. So hopefully we get this done and then we can keep it going. Get as ready as you can for the BSF, and I'll be doing the same thing. Much appreciate you all, everybody. Have a good one.